what in Queer Nation is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Queerality, the #1 all-queer talk show here on the internet. We cover everything from politics and pop culture to media and beyond. I'm your host with quite possibly the least, Rikki Blank. Pleasure to see you all again. Whether this is your first time listening or even a longtime listener of the show, thank you for tuning in and just know you're one of God's chosen people. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into our episode today. If you'd like what you'd see and you'd like to connect with myself or our guests, tip us, connect with one of our affiliated charities, or even sponsor the show, you can text Queerality to 850-695-4287. Again, that's 850-69-LGBTQ, and it'll take you directly to our landing page. Do it now. It'll make you feel really good about yourself, I promise. All right, guys, let's get to it. We have an incredible guest in studio with us today. He's an amazing artist, whether on his own right or with his band. No. All right, guys, I hope you're ready for this one. We have an incredible guest in studio with us today. He's back with his first album in over 6 years with the band Neon Trees. Please welcome to the stage, Tyler Glenn. Start off really general here. First question is, how are you? How's everything going?
Today's good. Today's good so far. How are you?
You know what? It's I've really gotten to know every sort of like nook and cranny of my apartment pretty intimately.
I know. It's every other day is an interesting journey into psychosis. So
it really is. I mean, I think I've feng shuied this place probably at least a good like 3 times now at this point.
No, totally. It's like the movement of a plant or the changing of a piece of art. Like it's the little things.
It really is. So, I mean, kind of getting into it. So it's been 6 years since you guys have put out your first album. You've done Kinky Boots. You put out a solo album in the meantime. So why was it time to regroup all of a sudden? What brought Neon Trees back together?
I think, we had always been together ostensibly. I think it was just like there were a lot of middle years between 2014 and to now where, I don't know. It was like a bit of a journey and a process. There was a lot of business decisions to be made. We were always writing. And after Kinky Boots, I felt like very definitively like, I'm ready to write a Neon Trees record. I'm ready to go to LA and record it. And right after New York, I went right to LA and started working and writing. And I just felt I think before that, it had always been like, oh, maybe I'll do another solo thing, or maybe it's a new thing. And I think after that experience on Broadway, it gave me a lot of my groove back, my confidence back, a vision creatively. And I think that's why. And I felt really supported by my band too, to sort of just go off and start writing. And I wrote 40 songs and, it slowly became this record. And I think it felt right at the time. And I don't know, I'm happy we waited this long. I don't want to wait another 6 years, but I think it happened the way it happened,
Mm-hmm. And so when you're writing, I mean, do you have an idea when you're writing a song of like, hey, this is going to be a solo thing, this might be a new thing, this is a Neon Trees thing, or do you kind of just like dump everything on the table and kind of just try to like parse it all together? Like, how does that process work for you?
I'm pretty like, especially this last record process, like I just write. I don't really even like stick to like a theme or an idea right away. And I think the things rise to the top. I think the thing about Neon Trees is it's very much a band, but it's still very much like me writing the songs and my experience and influence. So as much as like a solo record is different, it's like still my voice. And I don't feel like I'm, especially now being out and sort of where I am in my life, like I don't think I'm really like separating themes or ideas or even voices. It's just more like vibes and what do I want to say, and is this the right thing for this record almost now, which is cool. Like it wasn't always that way with my band. I think I feel really free creating with them, as of late. So
and I mean, as far as being out goes, I mean, this is really, I mean, the first album, well, the first Neon Trees album that you've put out since you've come out. And I mean, and how much has that influenced your writing process?
Yeah, no, you're right. A ton. I wrote Pop Psychology in the Closet, and that's our third record. And that was the record that came out around the time that I came out. And a lot of people attribute that record to like a coming out record, but I still was very much in the closet wrestling with identity while I was writing that album. So you're right. This is the first record where not only am I out as a gay man, but I'm also out of the trappings of the faith that I was raised in. And like, there's like, I feel like label-less almost, or like there's no ceiling creatively where I could go. And I really put a lot of energy into this record, and I feel even more confident now. Like I just want to continue in that energy of just like, there's no ceiling to topics. There shouldn't be like a roof to where you can go creatively. And it's totally influenced like just my comfortability with pronouns, or being honest with themes and topics, and trying to honesty. Like I love pop music. I make pop music, but I think when there's a level of honesty and a component of like personality, it just rises, it just elevates shit. And I think for me, that's what I've seen. And I just want to continue on that path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, and speaking to that level of comfortability and there not being, a necessity for a label anymore, all the lyrics on this album are really sort of like genderless. And I mean, and is that sort of a distinction that you wanted to make in terms of it being like a pop record? Like you still wanted it to be sort of like universally acceptable and just have it, sort of be at the back of everyone's mind that, okay, like he is out, he is gay, like he's writing this from the perspective of, a gay relationship.
You know what?
You saying it on the record?
You know what? I wasn't even conscious of that, where I have been on previous records. Like on my solo record, Excommunication, I did use he. I was blatant about those things, but I also was sort of talking to God at the same time as my ex. It was this kind of duality. And I also called God she on that record. Like I don't really have a subscribed idea of who God is even, but on this record, I didn't even think about it, because I do, as I just start to live in my life these last few years, I do just feel like effortlessly myself. I don't know. I think you're right. Like I feel like, I think I never say, where like on our song Everybody Talks, or on past records I've said she, just sort of to hide it. On this record I never say, you're right, it's genderless. And I think the message is clear. I didn't even really think about like hiding it anymore. Maybe that's a good thing, like it was just sort of like, this is me and this is what I'm talking about. And yes, it's obviously about a guy because I'm an out gay man, and those are my, feelings. I suppose that's where I was coming from when I was writing it.
Totally. And then before we kind of get further into the album too, just on the song Holy Ghost, for example, I know you obviously have talked in the past about walking away from your faith. And so this album as well is really sort of about one singular relationship, right? Like one breakup specifically. And so did it kind of feel like, in a sense, that you were almost going through like two breakups at the same time? Because I mean, there's still that idea that you're sort of using like the same imagery, and that's always going to be sort of, a part of your life, having that spirituality there, but at the same time kind of distancing yourself from it. And so what was it like kind of feeling like you're going through almost like a dual breakup?
Crazy. Yeah. I think as much as it is about one person, it's always, I feel like I'm also mourning the loss and also the experience of moving past other traumas as well. So I'm thank you for noticing that. Like Holy Ghost to me, obviously I was putting the spin on it because there's themes of ghosting on this record and being sort of forgotten about. And it's this phenomenon of we can just unfollow someone or meet someone and all of a sudden they don't exist. And I wanted to take the idea of having the Holy Spirit, or this idea of this companion that when in religion, where if you're doing good, you'll feel the Holy Spirit, you'll feel the Holy Ghost. And if you're not, the Holy Ghost leaves you. And that was sort of an interplay on words, but yeah, I still think those themes are going to creep in until they don't. I'm still in a place in my life where sometimes it is brimming right on the surface, like that sort of thing. I'm happy that I don't want to be the type of person that just like throws their life away and starts fresh just because. I think there's still value in looking in the past and analyzing what that was, but also always moving forward. And I hope that's what I'm doing. At least that's how it feels right now. But
hmm Absolutely. And then, I mean, I would say that the album is definitely, I think, melancholy would be a nice way to say it. So from the opening to the closing, I mean, it definitely still seems like you're in a place where you're potentially trying to, exercise a lot of these demons that you had previously. And I mean, would you say that's accurate? And like, what does happiness look like to you now?
um, the record. I think the themes of the record, the title of the record, the imagery of the record with the ghost, it's all very kind of melancholy. But I think there's a lot of like desire to get past that on the record, and I wanted this record to feel like you were going, like I was going through it, versus like, oh, I've reached an enlightenment phase and everything is fine. Because I don't necessarily believe happiness is an endpoint. I feel like happiness is a thing that can come for a few hours during the day and leave. And I'm in a place where I'm treating life a little bit more reverently than I ever did. It's more like, this moment's now. I can't really worry if the next 5 days are going to feel this way. But also remind myself, like, what are things that bring you joy and happiness, and how can I get back to that sometimes? And so I feel just very like, for the first time in a long time, the last few years, in my body, like every day, like I'm doing this today. And it's less about, look, I have goals and aspirations, and I also look into my future and go like, is this really the direction I need to go, and stuff like that. But I will say I'm very like, what will be as well. I don't know if that sounds, I don't want to come off like I'm ever like, oh, I'm enlightened, but there's some enlightenment comes with personal growth. And I just want to be honest in everything I do. And I think this record needed to sound like what I was feeling. I was going through it. I was trying to, it's interesting when you're codependent to someone, how hard it is to unentangle that stuff. And
Absolutely.
I just wanted to be blatant and real about it. And so I guess if it's melancholy or a bit sad at times, I think that's just reality, and I think the record still sounds really energetic. And if people had no idea what I was talking about, I think people could find themselves in it and have a good time. But maybe that's just my hopes with it. But
yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with you. I do think that happiness is a journey. It's not an endpoint. And I think one of the things I loved about the voice of the record is that it doesn't necessarily have a like, okay, I was suffering and then, this is like this nice, happy climax and ending. Is that it feels, and I mean, I've listened to it several times now. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great record.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. But I like the feeling of feeling like I'm almost like there, like suffering with you. Like I feel like I'm there exercising everything out with you. Like, and it doesn't have like a pin. It's like, okay, well, I made it from here to here, and now I'm still growing. Nothing is ever just like, okay, well, like I've washed my hands of this person, and now it's done, and now I can move on with my life.
Yeah, I mean, I wish like I used to live that way, where it was like everything I did, it's a movie or it's a TV show, and like, but it's just not life. I mean, we know that, but life is not like that. Like, I feel like for the rest of my life, I'm gonna have remnants of this relationship. Like, hopefully, it doesn't make me feel the way it did 2 years ago. I feel freer from it today than I did then. But I think that's the reality. It's like, we only do have this life, and everything that we experience, there's still going to be, pieces of it. And I think that's the reality. And I'm glad that you found joy in it and not like you were turned off by it. I appreciate that. I think there's pop music. I think pop music doesn't have to be fluffy and frilly. And if it is, it is. And I love that too. Like, I love it all. So yeah, anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
No, I mean, well, I'm definitely just like you in that. Like, I'm a huge fan of The Cure. I do love my goth rock, and so like
yeah.
I do find a lot of joy and catharsis, and sometimes having to like suffer for like 45 minutes, and then all of a sudden kind of come out of it on the other end. Like,
yeah, I have a very goth heart from middle school that still stays with me. So very much.
Yeah, so it's kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier with like the album's imagery, I guess maybe I'm stupid. I didn't see the album cover as a ghost. I kind of saw it as maybe someone like hiding under a sheet in their apartment, and I was like, okay, that's hilarious that they sort of like intentionally or unintentionally sort of like captured like the collective mood of 2020.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's what I like about the album cover. There's other art we've used in some videos and other singles and stuff that makes it blatantly look like a ghost, but I liked that too. Like obviously I've had that image for probably a year and a half, so I also didn't know writing about these themes on this record were going to be so sort of apropos to a lot of what people are feeling, but that's cool. I'll have to look at it. That's cool. I like that feeling where I'm over it, just sitting on my couch alone.
Literally. So let's see. I guess kind of going back a little bit, about like 6 years, I guess. So you didn't really have a sort of a normal coming out. I mean, you famously came out in Rolling Stone, and so like, what's that like? What's that sort of that pressure like? Where was your head at that time?
It was, I had come out a couple months prior to like friends and family and my band and people in my life, and I knew that the article was coming out that week in March, and I was really excited, but I was so nervous. And I was on the other side of it. I was greeted with a lot of support. I was greeted with a lot of support from people that I thought wouldn't give, like Mormons. Like at the time when I came out, I was still actively believing in Mormonism. Right. And so that added a different component too, where I was still worried, what would they say? What would they think? How does this, make me feel, or how is my standing now in this religion now that I'm coming out? And I felt supported and tried to live my life a few years that way, and realized, for me, I had to look at the things that I was subscribing to and believed in. And I realized this, I don't want to go off. This isn't a go off on a religion tangent, but I really recognized how toxic and damaging the messaging that I had believed in my whole life was. And I also realized none of it was for me as a queer person. Like, none of this is for me. Why have I carried so much devotion and belief in this? And then you start to look further and you go, this is bad shit. And like, I've been sort of conditioned and wired to like completely believe in this thing that's just not even reality. And so I went through a real tailspin, and I think coming out as gay had a certain pressure and anxiety, but leaving the religion and purging a lot of that, I think has been harder. There's so many things that, like, I know I'm gay. I've always felt that, but for so much of my life, I rejected it and suppressed it, or tried to commodify it or compartmentalize it to fit something that was never meant to fit in anyway. And, I think I love being a few years past all of that, because it's only made me see, like, yes, like, you are growing, you're on your way. Yeah, I don't know how to put a pin in that thought, but like it's been a really wild up and down couple of years. And as much as that's felt like crazy, I have to remind myself it's amplified by the idea that, like, I do this publicly for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people have seen me go through this. A lot of fans have watched me go up and down the last few years. So it adds a real interesting weight and pressure,
Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, I know there's sort of, I think, a trepidation with a lot of artists after they come out, where I think they have a fear of maybe being like pigeonholed as like a gay band or a gay artist, and thinking about how that'll sort of like, dissect and sort of separate their fan base. So was there any thoughts about that? Any sort of like trepidation around that?
I think there was like there were certain outside voices that were like, this might be bad, or this might divide you. But I think as we've seen culture progress, I will say homophobia absolutely still exists in the music industry, like many industries. There's still so much to go. But I sometimes don't also feel like I have been fully accepted into the gay music community. Like I don't, so it's like this kind of flip thing where it's like, I'm a gay artist that has had songs on the charts, that has access to certain things. And I don't always see Neon Trees mentioned in certain queer spaces. So it's this weird thing where like, I've always kind of felt like I don't necessarily fit into the communities that I could fit in. I've always felt a bit of an outlier. And yet like, I think it's only helped fans adhere more to Neon Trees and adhere more to like what I do is they see like the personality behind it. It's not just like a fun pop rock song. It's like, I think it's only, at least in my experience, like it only has added more meaning and depth to people that enjoy the music that we put out. So, I mean, my answer to that is like, maybe that was a consideration, but also like, I think that's reductive and dumb. And if it has like, if I've lost fans over me living my truth, like, I don't know. It's like, fuck that, I guess. It's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of interesting how you've mentioned how you don't always see Neon Trees sort of being included in a lot of queer conversations about harder spaces. And to what did you attribute that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's because Neon Trees' initial success was a few years before I even came out. I don't know if it's, I don't know. I don't think about it all the time, but even just putting this new record out, I'm absolutely out and gay and always talking about my experience as a queer person. This record is absolutely from a queer point of view. There's a lot of themes in it that are definitively queer, and yet I don't see it. You know, it came out the same week that Folklore came out by Taylor Swift, and I'm like, I wish all these podcasts that I listen to that talk about queer culture and pop also included us in the conversation. I understand pop stars and their connection to the queer community, and I understand I as a person and a part of that community, I love pop stars, but I just, it's this interesting thing where it's like, well, why are we spending so much time stressfully looking for queer themes in her record when I just put out a record that's absolutely queer? I don't know. It just made me like, I get it's Taylor Swift. This is no shade to her. I love her record. But I wonder, like, why aren't we including, you know, Tegan and Sarah put out an EP that same, it just, there's queer artists also putting out music. Why are we putting so much still focus on our straight allies? It confuses me sometimes.
Yeah, it does for me too. And I think there's an interesting thing that I've heard from other artists and comedians such as Mateo Lane, where they sort of wonder, like, why is it so hard to get gay fans to go and, you know, be purveyors of gay art?
Sure.
When, you know, and as good as their intentions are, I mean, like you mentioned, Taylor Swift has an incredible platform and has used it well. But at the same time, all they're doing are appropriating the aesthetics of queerness and trying to bring their message and their art to a larger crowd. But it's like, why aren't gay artists or gay fans going to gay artists, going to queer artists?
Yeah, and on the flip, like I you know, you mentioned the worry about coming out and sort of losing part of your audience. Like I don't get the advantage of, like, I have to do so much more work as an out gay person that I didn't when I was in the closet, you know? And that sucks. It's like, you know, and this isn't a woe is me, and I understand too, I could sound biased because it's my experience and I'm also talking about it as a person that's actively putting out music, but it is a fascinating phenomenon. Why aren't we you know, why isn't Vincent the biggest pop star this year? You know, why isn't Troye Sivan just as big as Taylor? I don't know. And he's giant. Like it is this interesting. It's this interesting, you know, fascination. Like the Scissor Sisters. Why aren't they still? Why, you know, it's, I don't know. I'm going down a rabbit hole now, but it's just like it's an interesting examination of us and our community.
Mm-hmm. And then in sort of trying to, like, you know, navigate that, at the same time, do you find it's more important now to sort of be more visibly queer, like, in, you know, with everything going on right now, but then also still trying to, like, straddle that fine line of, like, am I still going to, like, push people away? Am I going to attract a larger gay crowd? Like, what's that been like, trying to navigate that for you?
I can honestly say I don't overly think about it. Like you know, something about me anyway, regardless of me being out or in the closet in my career, I've always been a bit of a flamboyant performer. I've always never shied away from, you know, certain aesthetics. And so I think Neon Trees has always felt a little queer, regardless of me being in or out of the closet. And I only, like, think about wanting to attract more of the gay audience because I feel like I have a perspective to share, and it's set to the tune of pop music. And I just want to be able to, like, I don't know, I want to continually boost queer artists that are actually speaking the experience versus having to, like, find it hidden in, like, a pop star song, I guess, you know.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I kind of want to take a really hard pivot just for 1 second, because I have a question that's been, like, burning with me, and it's, I'm sure you've seen that Spotify CEO put out that statement that said it's not enough for bands to, you know, just record music every 3 to 4 years anymore and still have it be viable. And sort of based on, you know, your guys' creative output, how does that affect you guys, and is that going to change your process with writing? Do you think you're gonna expedite more? Do you think you're going to sort of, like, give them the middle finger and say, no, this is just how we work, deal with it?
It's interesting. I mean, I've been thinking about this for a couple of years. You know, I don't think we ever intended to take 6 years between records. I think it sort of happened that way. I never stopped writing songs. We never stopped recording bodies of work that could have potentially been records. I think a lot of our experience had to do with, like, timing and business relationships and things like that, changing, and the need for them to change. And we're in a really cool place in that respect now. But I don't agree with what he said, because he's also not paying artists fairly at all. Like, his company is actually stealing from artists. And look, I'm stoked that there's a platform that we can see metrics like there is with streaming. And I'm not one to like, because I also think culture is also demanding streaming to be a thing. Like, we want it now. We want it all the time. We don't really want to pay for it. That's fine. But I think until his company, like, starts to really, really analyze how they're treating their artists, then that's, like, an absolute fucked up thing to say. And it sets a dangerous precedent. You know, as it almost dullifies the experience of being an artist. Like, I didn't have this dream to one day realize I had to, like, also be this content creator outputting things left and right. Like, I don't think, as a lot of artists that actually, like, spend time on their craft, like, I don't think they have those mind. I don't have that mind where every day is going to be inspiring and I'm going to put out a 2-minute song for the algorithm. It just doesn't make sense to me. And at the same time, I understand culture, and I get, like, okay, we you know, news cycles are 24 hours. Album cycles now are, like, a month, you know, to promote. I think things are shorter just in general. So I understand the concept of output and, like, you know, but I hate this idea of just, like, constantly feeding, because then does anything mean anything anymore, or are we just digesting and shitting it out and moving on to the next? Like, to me, I have to pay attention to my gut, as a creator, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I think you bring up an interesting point about the disposability of art now and the fact that people are just consuming. But I mean, also at the same time, people are living, a lifestyle where really everything is so much more on the go than it ever has been. And there needs to be a certain element of transportability. And I mean, let me see how I could phrase this here. But do you think it's an artist problem with not wanting to evolve necessarily, or a listener problem that people don't go home and take out their LP anymore for the most part, sit it down and have like a full listening experience? You're getting it in your car, at the gym, on the way to work. And do you think that's just, like I said, as a fan, like, do you think that's just an issue with how they digest the art, and then we need to sort of regress our ways of taking it in? Or
no, like, I don't think there's anything I don't think there's anything wrong with certain, like, I don't want to sound regressive, but I do know how much time and effort it goes into even like build a record. Like, I took 2 years to make this record. Eat, sleep, and breathe it. Aesthetics every day, having so many phone calls about this record, and then you put it out and you hope for the best. And it's this interesting, I think a lot of it has to do with where I'm at maybe in my life. Maybe I'm just speaking from a personal view. Is it like is the dream over for me? Is the dream sort of like that I bought into as a youth not the same dream anymore? And do I need to sort of look at it that way and go, okay, the next decade's going to look completely different than the last decade, like everything, like life just continually evolves. Do I change my own perspective on music? Do I put as much? I don't know. I think it might, for better or for worse, change the types of artists that we have in the future too. I don't know. That's not to like, I hope I don't sound like I'm shitting on anything new or modern. I'm very much into, I listen like everyone does to music and to playlists, and I understand it's quick. Yeah, I don't know if I have a definitive thought on it. I think for me, it goes back to like the CEO of a company not fairly paying people that create that platform and make it what it is, and then him demanding those artists as if they're just like working for the algorithm. It makes me feel like that's not what I recognize as artistry. That's not what I recognize as the thing that I bought into or aspired to be, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, and I think I agree with your stance, because I think if that's the way that the content creation landscape is going to be, there's nothing to stop labels from implementing more, AI to, make all these songs and just keep pumping it out and just keep pumping it out. And so at that point, it's like, okay, well then why did we ever have the need to have these artists create this music in the first place now, if we're just going to have computers that are just going to pump out everything anyway? And it's taking away the specialness and the message and the intent and everything that goes into making an album. Like you said, that like the 2-year process of like eating it, breathing it, drinking it, sweating it, like everything. And so
yeah,
it's a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like. I still think there's always going to be. I think it's not going to take away from like, great art. I think great art's going to exist. Like going back to a Taylor Swift record, she worked on it for a month and put it out, and it was like the biggest record of her career. And she's being. I think there are ways to do things quickly and sort of effortlessly. I like that. I like the instantaneous thing of like recording an idea and putting it on SoundCloud, and like the next day it could pop off. There are things I really like about the modern model, but yeah, I do worry about how that's training new artists and how that's sort of like you said, stripping away identity and soul,
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's interesting too because a lot of people like a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce can drop an album just willy nilly, and all of a sudden it becomes like the biggest thing of their career. And even you guys to an extent, and other bands that have existed as long as you guys have the ability to sort of retrain your fan base to say, hey, like this is a long form record. Like I want you to listen to it from beginning to end. I want you to go on the journey with us. But again, I think it goes back to sort of that. I don't think that with the current model that a lot of artists are going to have that luxury anymore.
Right.
You sort of say like, okay, I just want to put out this one project. It's going to be 2 hours long, and I want you to sit there and listen to it from beginning to end.
Right.
Because
right.
there's not as much of a place for it anymore.
Right. Yeah. I know it's fascinating. I still feel like those artists will exist, but it's an interesting like training ground for the next wave, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think I need to stop being a music nerd here. I could literally just sit here
totally,
but kind of have a gay job to do here. So going back to interviews that you've had in the past, you've mentioned in the past that you've had sort of imposter syndrome as an artist, and later when you came out, was there any of that sort of when you were like forming your first sort of like bits of identity as a gay man?
Yeah. I mean, I think I subscribe to, well, you only know what you know, and you only know your environment, and the culture at the time has a lot to do with that. I think the messages you receive in your home from your community. So I'm parsing a lot of like the last few years of my life. I've been parsing. Was that just wiring from a toxic thing that didn't even apply to me, or was that actually just a thing that I believed? Is that true? Like for me, like we talk about representation a lot now, and I think I'm the first one in line going like that is so fucking important to have those things, because as a kid growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, ostensibly pre-internet, pre-phones, I only had access to what I had access to, and so the model for a gay person was very limited. Mm-hmm. And that's not throwing shade on those stars or those icons at the time, but for me, that's all I had, and I never really saw myself in any of those examples. And then to compound that with like the messaging of like that I received from my faith expression growing up was, it's something you could change or something that you should suppress, or, it's not a really valid thing. It's like a feeling, you can change it. And I just feel like now I'm in a place in my life the last, I don't know, 3-4 years where I'm not worried about how my hands are going when I'm talking. I'm not worried that my voice inflection changes when I'm talking. Like, it feels so good to not have those little things that I used to be so specific about or worried about, not be a part of my life anymore. Like, there's certain toxic shit that I'm unwiring all the time, and I think a lot of that had to do, with figuring out, okay, who am I as a gay man? Who am I as a Mormon? Who am I as a rock star? Who am I as a vegan? Who am I as a like all these things that I piled on, and it's a lot of this dismantling for me. I was just like, it goes back to what I thought as a kid, like this punk rock mentality of like, fuck anything that anyone tells you how you have to be, or, I think it almost goes back to my initial feelings as a kid, which is kind of cool. Like a lot of the stuff in between messed all that up for me. So that's a very long-winded answer, but that's sort of my thoughts on the matter.
And I mean, and I think that sort of mentality is something a lot of us strive for, but I think also too with the current climate, it's been very polarizing, because then instead of saying like, hey, I don't want all these labels for myself, I kind of just want to explore, like as far as I can and push, my identity to its absolute limit so I can grow as a person. But at the same time, you have a lot of people who are right now, and rightfully so to an extent, asking that everyone sort of like takes a side, takes a stand, and then sort of like reinforces, you know, their labels. And I mean, and what's it like for you to sort of try to mitigate that?
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know. I agree with you. There needs to be a clearness and a sort of definitive view and belief. Like, there's some things to me that have never wavered or not made sense. Like, there's certain things that, like, I think I demand to know of people. Like, I don't stand for racism. I don't stand for homophobia, transphobia. I don't stand for anti-women, you know, things. I don't know. I'm very, there's things that just don't, like, I think you have to kind of know now, especially I get that mentality of like, because of the divisive nature of our country, you do want to know where you stand. At the same time, I love the space that the queer community is increasingly like broadening over the last few years of like, I love that. Like, I love that. I love the idea of a spectrum. I love when we add more things we can identify as. I think that's so important because it was so limited for me growing up. And I think it only helps people to have options. Like, so in that space, I'm very much like, we need room to grow. Like, you know, Sam Smith came out as gay. Now they're non-binary, but their pronouns are this. And I like that. I know it can seem a lot and confusing and information's always coming. But I think it's important to just have like this broadness. But I think there's just like hardline things that people don't stand for anymore because we just had to put up with so much bullshit in the system. And I think I love that. I think people need to be people of power definitely need to be called upon and called out and sort of questioned. We've gone on too long with a lot of the same people holding the same amounts of power, and I love that there's a certain dismantling going on. I know it's a very dicey thing, cancel culture, this idea of it, but I think I don't know. I like that the youth, and there's a culture that's not standing for it anymore. I think we do need to examine the people that we give power to, you know?
Yeah. And I have to agree in terms of labeling and pronouns that I think that culture always does need to evolve. And the ideas that we're sort of exploring right now in terms of identity, I mean, it's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just now we're finding the language to sort of explain these really esoteric concepts about who we are as people moving forward. And I think people somehow don't understand that. They think we're just sort of like, you know, playing more mind games, or like, you know, we're just sort of like, you know, playing this extended game of make-believe. But it's just like, they don't understand that there's been this massive group of people that for hundreds, if not thousands of years have always been there. And just now they're finding the language to explain who they really are as people and who they see themselves as. And not
absolutely. And
phase. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And look at the access that we had versus the access we have now. It's just like that. I know. I don't understand how that doesn't make sense to people, that notion of things evolving and new language and new messaging. I think that's so important. Absolutely. I agree with you.
Mm-hmm. So kind of wrapping this up a little bit here. So what advice do you have for people who are struggling with their spirituality in light of their queerness and having that internal struggle?
I guess I always have to preface by saying, like, I understand that everyone's situation is going to be different. Everyone's situation at home, their support system, how that's tied to finance, how that's tied to safety, housing. What I will say is that I think I always knew intrinsically how I felt when I felt harm, when I felt harmful messages, when I felt like I felt my spirit or my soul aching. Like, I knew I knew what that was. And I think all I can do is suggest to maybe reframe that and take away a specific religious component out of it and just go, for me, it's like being able to parse Mormonism away from spirituality has helped me. There was this need for me to like burn it all down and start anew, and I've been reassembling, and it's nice to like not have this filtration system of things that don't apply to me, with my own like intuition and my soul and my core, you know. So I think just to me, there's a lot. What I'll say is there's a lot of knowledge and power and answers that lie within inside of you, and I think we're always taught to have to go to this mysterious outside source. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn about our life and ourselves within. And I think just paying attention to those feelings have really helped me to become more spiritually evolved in the last couple of years. And then it's really helped me build my idea of like, okay, maybe there is a greater, higher power. I don't know what that's called, but I also don't feel pressure to name it anything yet. I think taking some of the pressure off in the spiritual sense is really good. I don't know. Is any of that helpful? I think those are the things that have helped me.
No, I absolutely think it does. And it actually brings me back to something I just heard last night. I was listening to another podcast, and the interviewee said something really interesting, which is that it's counterproductive for all of us to want to burn everything down and start over, because you need to have those existing frameworks and structures in place so you can study them and you can see what worked and you can learn and grow from it, and then you build next, and then you move on. And I think the same would go for anyone that's struggling right now, where I think there's so much of that internal struggle of saying like everything about me is wrong or everything about me needs to be erased and start over again. And it's just like, no, like you're amazing as you are. You have the framework already.
Yeah.
Learn what's best about you, just rediscover yourself, and then just like build it up from there. Like there's no reason for you to feel like you're inadequate in any way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like I love that. I love the idea. Like even for me, there was this want for me to throw out all the aspects of Mormonism, but I realized like, well, that's like 30 years of my life that I'm ostensibly just tossing out. What can I actually glean from that and like reframe that actually like it's just part of my life? Like, and I found joy in that too. Like there's cultural things about my upbringing that I still like, it's part of me. It's just it's part of me. So I totally hear you and believe you on that. Like at the same time, I think the application of burning things down when it comes to certain systems, sometimes you just need to like cut it out at the root and start over. I understand that, but I'm more on the mindset of yours where it's like, let's look at these things and go like that absolutely didn't work, or they were on the right track here. Let's rebuild from there. I like that train of thought. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. And then coming to an end here. So what's next for you? What's next for the band? What does the next year or two look like for you?
I wish going on tour like normal. I wish going to play like we normally would do. I'm writing more music. You know, I guess we're in this, like we said, this churn it out situation, but I'm not going to put things out that I don't stand by. I'm writing a book. I don't know. It's this weird period of transition in culture where we don't even know what the model for the career is going to look like in a couple of years, you know, and a big component of my career is live entertainment with like people jammed in a room. So I don't know. I'm really cognizant in watching it, but I'm still feeling inspired creatively, and I'm just deciding like, where do I put that? Is that in an album? Is that in a song? Or is that in a chapter in a book? Or is that in an idea for something else? You know, so that's kind of where I'm going. It's crazy to go. I put an album out 2 weeks ago after 2 years. It's hard to want to like jump right into a new project right away. I feel like normally there'd be a tour and we'd get it all out. So I don't know. I'm not stopping, and I feel a creative urge. So I'm still trying to identify what that's going to be, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I guess I lied about the last question because now I need to know about the book. So
it's very early. But I feel like I have a lot of stories to share and a lot of experiences that in a book form could be really, really helpful, especially to those that are younger than me, and maybe I don't always get the space to share in an album or in an interview. And so I just want to focus a lot of those. I'm not ready to write a memoir of my life, but I think I've lived a lot of lives in my walk here on this planet. And I just want to focus some of that into a long form thing. And it's crazy to say that as we live in an age where everything's 2 minutes and digestible. And now I'm looking to write a book, but I feel called to it. You know, I feel drawn to it. So.
Well, I can't wait to read your version of, you know, Motley Crue's The Dirt, Neon Trees.
Absolutely. Thank you.